Imagine hanging half your body out of a helicopter, wind slamming into your face at 100 miles per hour, jungle racing beneath you, and somewhere below, rifles are aimed directly at you. That was the job. Before we get into it, if you enjoy intense military history and real battlefield stories told without the Hollywood filter, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. We post powerful war stories every week, and you don't want to miss what's coming next. Now let's talk about one of the most exposed and dangerous roles of the Vietnam War, the helicopter door gunner. When American helicopters first entered Vietnam, they weren't built for heavy combat. They were essentially flying transports, crewed by a pilot, co-pilot, and crew chief. They carried troops, equipment, and supplies into areas where trucks simply couldn't go. The belief at the time was that mobility alone would provide the advantage. Speed would outmatch the enemy. Air movement would change the war. It didn't. The helicopters arrived largely unarmed. And it didn't take long for enemy fighters to realize that shooting down these aircraft could cripple operations. Helicopters began taking heavy fire. Many were damaged. Many crashed. The idea of flying into hostile territory without the ability to shoot back quickly proved deadly. So crews improvised. The first solution was simple. Remove the doors. Hand someone an M60 machine gun. Tell him to fire back. At first, this was often the crew chief leaning out of the open doorway, gripping the weapon while the helicopter banked and shook violently through the air. It wasn't precise. It wasn't stable. But it gave them something, and something was better than nothing. Soon, the role became official. A dedicated door gunner was assigned to cover the opposite side of the aircraft. Sometimes nicknamed the shotgun rider, he became more than just a man with a machine gun. He was the helicopter's eyes, its shield, and often its most vulnerable crew member. His responsibilities were constant. He scanned the ground for movement. He watched the skids and rotor clearance when landing in tight zones. He helped load and unload troops or wounded soldiers. He maintained his weapon and sometimes assisted with basic aircraft tasks. And when things turned violent, which they often did without warning, he laid down suppressive fire. Firing from a helicopter wasn't as simple as pointing and pulling the trigger. The aircraft was moving fast. The platform vibrated constantly. Targets below were moving, ducking, blending into jungle cover. Bullets fired from a moving helicopter carried the forward momentum of the aircraft itself. That meant the gunner had to lead his shots carefully, aiming ahead of the target while adjusting for speed and distance, all within seconds. As enemy fire continued to bring down helicopters, more permanent weapon setups were introduced. M60 machine guns were mounted on swivel or pintle mounts to provide better stability. Some crews experimented beyond official regulations, adding extra guns, rocket pods, and even miniguns capable of firing thousands of rounds per minute. The famous Huey helicopter gradually transformed from a transport vehicle into a flying weapons platform. Eventually, purpose-built gunships like the Cobra would emerge, designed specifically for attack roles. But before those aircraft became common, the door gunner was the frontline defense. There was no typical day in this job. Veterans often described the experience as long stretches of boredom interrupted by sudden bursts of chaos. Hours spent staring at endless jungle, searching for movement. Then, in an instant, gunfire erupting from below. Helicopters often flew just above treetops at high speeds. Door gunners were partially exposed to open air. You might assume they were heavily secured inside the aircraft. In reality, safety measures were minimal. A standard lap belt was common. Many preferred a torso harness, sometimes called a monkey harness, which allowed them to lean out for better angles while still being attached to the helicopter. Even so, violent maneuvers or sudden impacts could throw a man from the doorway. And yes, there were cases where gunners fell. Some survived, some did not. You may have heard the claim that the life expectancy of a door gunner in combat was 5 minutes. While that number isn't statistically precise, it reflects a harsh truth. Door gunners face some of the highest casualty rates among helicopter crews. They were the most exposed. They were highly visible. And from the enemy's perspective, they were the immediate threat. If you're finding this story powerful so far, take a second to subscribe. It helps this channel grow and allows us to keep bringing you detailed, no-nonsense military history like this. Among the most dangerous missions were medical evacuations. Helicopters would rush into active combat zones to retrieve wounded soldiers. Originally, these aircraft were marked with red crosses and intended to operate as neutral medical transports. But war rarely respects symbols. Many evacuation helicopters were fired upon anyway. Door gunners became a necessary addition even on these missions. They provided protection while pilots descended into hot landing zones. They helped carry wounded onto the aircraft, sometimes stepping onto hostile ground themselves. They flew repeated trips between battlefield and hospital, sometimes forced to prioritize who would go first based on the severity of injuries. Those decisions carried emotional weight long after the war ended. When ground troops were pinned down or close to being overrun, helicopters often became the last lifeline. The aircraft would approach at high speed. Door gunners would fire continuously to suppress enemy positions while soldiers scrambled aboard. Bullets struck the helicopter's skin. Metal rang with impacts. Every second on the ground felt like an eternity. Protection for door gunners was limited. Helicopters had to remain light to stay maneuverable. Heavy armor was rarely practical. The aircraft itself could be penetrated by rifle fire. Flak jackets offered some protection against shrapnel, but were largely ineffective against high-velocity rounds. Some gunners wore additional ceramic plates, but these were heavy and uncomfortable in the tropical heat, and many prioritized mobility instead. In reality, their primary protection was speed and firepower. Get in, do the job, get out. Door gunners also carried the psychological burden of uncertainty. Without modern optics or thermal imaging, they relied on eyesight and instinct. The jungle concealed everything. A sudden movement could be an armed fighter or a civilian in the wrong place at the wrong time. Decisions had to be made instantly, often without full clarity. Nearly every helicopter crew witnessed loss. Friends killed mid-mission. Aircraft going down in flames. Close calls that could have ended differently by inches. The trauma accumulated quietly. And yet, despite the danger, despite the exposure, despite the fear, thousands of young men stepped into that open doorway and did the job. They helped pioneer air assault tactics that would shape modern military doctrine for decades. The concept of rapid air mobility combined with suppressive fire became a cornerstone of future operations. What began as improvisation under fire evolved into structured combat aviation strategy. The image of a soldier leaning out of a helicopter door, machine gun blazing over dense jungle, became one of the defining visuals of the Vietnam War. It was a role defined by risk, by speed, by split-second decisions, and by a level of exposure few other combat positions required. If you made it this far, you clearly appreciate deep military history. Make sure you're subscribed and drop a comment below telling us which war role we should cover next. There are many more untold stories ahead. And as always, thanks for watching.